Now you're listening into Paul's Unscripted podcast. I think all of us are kind of gaining a lot of weight during
Yeah, I mean, what
this
am I supposed to
tough
do, right? I
time.
mean, I could go for walks, but I'm consciously just constantly just cautious, right? And I have my mask on and I want to make sure that it's
Yeah.
safe and everything, but I can't breathe. And I know that there's a certain exercise for people who do extreme sports where you asphyxiate yourself and you try to, I guess, make sure
That's
that
what they
yeah,
call altitude training.
yeah, but I'm not about that, and I'm not in a place where I would want to do that ever, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think you should do that.
yeah, so I just go around
J-
the labs doing that around the neighborhood basically, but
mm,
it's definitely seasonal. I think where when the economy opens up, which is it has, right, and you go back to your old routine, all this weight is just gonna dissipate instantly,
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 thing is gonna be the new norm. I mean, like after a certain period of time, you can't really get shocked on like how many people are getting it, and people would be like, in the end, people would be like, oh, you got COVID-19. Oh, I do too. Oh, we're friends and something like that. I mean, like it's just gonna be a new norm.
I mean, I don't know if you actually experienced this at all, but my friends and I talked about how in early January, there was a time when all of us got mysteriously sick, right? And it was not
Yeah.
like the common flu. It seemed to be more serious because it persisted for longer, but also our symptoms were way, aggravated. And then we just all wean off of it slowly, but in a way, I think that we've all been exposed to it already. It's just the symptoms are manifesting differently, right? Again,
Yeah.
I might
Yeah.
have already
True.
had it. That's and if the news I've been receiving are really just conflicting, no one's pinpoint on exactly what the cause is, and um, how it could we could potentially develop a vaccine for it. We have testing sites here, but it's gonna be some time. It's gonna be a really really long time before schools can reopen again. For people who are not in
Yeah. Sure.
university,
Even
it's
in
next
Malaysia.
year. Yeah, it's next year, and well, it's not as bad as say Kuwait, which I don't even know what's going
I
on.
think I think the problem with Kuwait is that the lack of management, the man management is number one probably. Then number two, probably not a lot of like the public don't really adhere to what government said. So that's why I think the Kuwait case rate I think it's even larger when compared to Malaysia. I'm like, if you compare the two countries, Kuwait and Malaysia is like a two different like size country, and Kuwait is very small, and the possibility of you getting the COVID-19 is like likely increase
And I mean, every
by
day is a
like
thousand cases, so
100%. Yes,
you'll be wiping out the country
it's
in no time. I
crazy.
mean, of course, I'm kidding, but it's kind of true. They're only protecting their own people, and I've heard of some really terrible stories. Actually, I don't know if you've heard of this one where
Mm,
there is a group of Ghanaian people from Ghana, who have been gathered around the Ghana embassy in a park with basically no shelter, and they're just living there with lacking resources and whatnot. And now a couple of outsiders, independent corporations are trying to help them, because no one's helping them. Their own government aren't helping them, and even though Black
wow,
Lives Movement is
seriously.
prevalent right now, we've also got to consider that
Yeah,
most Arabs and most Kuwaitis consider anybody who's not Arab a second class citizen.
yeah,
So,
true,
which I think
kind of.
is, it's the hypocrisy is real, and
Yeah, I
you
mean,
and I
like
live there, so we
they're just
understand
trying.
systematic racism.
Yeah, I think they're just trying to do woke shit, like post black screen on Instagram and all that stuff, but they don't really try to help the community, especially the black community within those like area. And I think that's the biggest hypocrisy that we're facing right now. People like to have um how can I say this? People would like to look like they're not racist, but deep down, actually, like there is.
I
I mean,
mean,
like,
we all do. We are all kind of slightly racist, but it's more
yeah,
of
true.
how we're trying to, rebuke that and how,
Suppress it.
yeah, suppress it, or even just come to an understanding. Hey, have I been
Yeah.
culturally conditioned to feel a certain way about somebody, even though I'm not trying to be, but maybe through the way that I've been raised or the media, I do have a certain stereotype image of what certain ethnic groups represent, and some stereotypes are good and they definitely do. Some of it is true, but at the same
Yeah.
time, some of it is damaging and demeaning, and they're not even the right kind of stereotypes. I think in the long run could project a very a very bad image for the people involved because they can't really escape that stereotype and not maybe
True.
not be able to acquire the jobs they would like to, or be in certain groups of friends, or even social circle and so forth. So that's, I
I'm.
think, something that is worthwhile to like examine. Of course, you can't force feed people to, care for a social cause. You can't force people to be supportive in a way that you would want to on your own terms. And it's going to take generations, like third generations or
Yeah.
so, for things to be, I think, loosen up a little bit. But I think more than anybody else, people like us who are immigrants in the Middle East understand that it's something that's prevalent.
True. I think I mean like about this racist issue, I think we should approach it like it's a kind of a disease that everyone have. I mean like if somebody is being racist, we should tell them, oh, you have racism issue out there, and then you should control it. And most people, when they're acting racist, actually they don't really know what they're being racist at. And like when other people are showing them, oh, you guys are being racist, and they should have an open mind and accept that they are somewhat like being that kind of racist toward other people, and try to, I mean like, to fix themselves up and
Be
try to
complicit.
change, probably. Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced this at all, but throughout your life or your childhood, have you ever had conversations with your parents that you thought were casually racist? Remarks that they made
Dude,
that
a
just seemed
lot. Dude,
off, and you just
seriously, a lot, man. I mean, like, and me and my friend make a term that everybody in this world are casually racist deep down. I'm like, it's just like, for example, right? How can I say this without being like
offensive.
sound so racist? It's hard. Okay, I mean like Malay moms, like this probably more prominent within the older generation, because like back in the olden days, like back in like in 90s, back in Malaysia, there were a strong racial divide that divide the races within Malaysia, which is Malay, Indian, and Chinese were the majorities. And so sometimes, like my parents, and not my parents, sometimes the older generation, I'm like, even my friends' parents, they would say like, this Indian guy, why is he driving so slow, or for example, for this Chinese girl, this Amoya, oh my god. And I was like,
Well, what does our
that's a
nationality have to
problem.
do with anything
Yeah.
else, right? It seems to be a
Yes,
descriptor,
yes.
like you're no
And
more than whatever ethnic group you belong to.
true. I mean, like, for that, I mean, you kind of understand what they're like, where they're coming from, because the way that they grew up were a lot of like racial divide, and there was a lot of tension between the races. And back in the days, it was survive or be eaten, kind of. The vibe was kind of like that. So that's why there, like, people back in the days, like older generation of Malaysian, they were more focused on their own race rather than like to have a harmonious a melting pot or a mosaic, if I could say, of population of people around the community. And yeah, I think the way that they grew up really like kind of uh shaped them on what they're like really is now. And for me, I understand like their point of view and what they're coming from, and I understand that like right now there's a lot of I mean like the world are getting like globalized, and from that, from me personally having like traveling the world at an early age opens my eyes toward like being more open-minded and how can I say and being curious on what other cultures what other people's culture may have, and what I could offer my culture to them and what they can offer to me. So that's why
Which is
I
what
think
most
that
cultures are, right? I mean, cultures are built that way.
yes, yeah. So that's why I was like, there's what's the point of being racist? What's the end goal that you're gonna get from being racist to like other people, other culture? And I'm like, you you won't get nothing except for hatred. I mean, like the BLM movement and the George Floyd thing. That's a freaking like biggest evidence that you can ask for. Like, oh, what's the worst case scenario of being having a systematic racism or having a having a racist community within that area could lead to. It would lead to anarchy, riot, and all the stuff. And then the sad thing is that when the riot and the looting happens in America, and especially in Minnesota, and people are looking through their glass phone, some of them would get the like wrong message and say that, oh, this black people, why they're doing this riot thing, why are they like looting the stores and destroying properties and all that stuff. I'm like, it's very hard to pinpoint on, like you can't really generalize everything like within from like seeing the video within your phone, because you don't really know, you're not there, and you don't know what really happened to them. And number one, I think even the how media portraying the riots and the looting stuff are very very different when they compare like black riot and white riot. Because white riot are, let's say they were angry, they were kind of like, how can I say, they were mad toward this certain this and this and this. And then if it comes to the black riot, they would go, oh, they're criminals, they're thugs, they would hit them, they would hit the black community with this, what do you call it, this preconceived words that could incriminate the black community. Same goes to like Muslim. I'm like, if you could see a Muslim within news and it is somewhat related to a bombing, they would, I was fucking sure they would put like a word that related to terrorism, to word towards to like Osama bin Laden and all that stuff. And I would like,
these are the buzzwords.
I would be like, oh my god, yeah, you took all the words that you wanted to. And I was like, it's hard to change the narrative. But I kind of feel like nowadays, due to advancement of technology and globalization, it's easier to get empathized with like other people, because they are represented within this platform, regardless of their race, religion, and status and culture. And from them speaking out within those platform, tells the story, and it changed the narrative of the traditional media, and it can even touch people's hearts even better when it comes to these new platforms
I think
such
stories are
as Twitter
important.
and all
It's
that.
if not, I think one would argue that stories, news stories are what has led us to be, alive and functioning and evolved as we have. And I think that they can be used as tools of propaganda, but they can also be used for
True.
betterment. And this is why representation is so important. And you would want your children to grow up with these stories that reflect or represent them in a positive light, or show them the scopes, or if not the possibilities. And I think we didn't have the privilege to be represented during times when we grew up, but now there'd be no reason at all why you couldn't just pursue the path you wanted to, irrespective of what your ethnic group is, right? But
Yeah.
it's I always think there will be that binary opposition, that whole me versus them, or I've got all these words in the English language that are really just not neutral. They have negative connotations to them.
Yeah, true.
And
even
you
even
can't go
in
back
terms
in
of
time.
gender.
Yeah, you can't really go back in time and change or go back to the first time ever that it's been coined negatively. But over time, it has become this new thing. And this is why I think it's just so important to have open conversations about ways in which we are complicit in being racist or being biased. I think, like, we're all culprit. Like, it's not we're better than other people, and I think we can all learn to be better. And this is what I always say: I'm not going to give people those tools, or spoon feed them the answers as to what I consider or perceive to be better, because you can Google it.
Yeah,
And
true.
a lot of people just want this whole elaborative sort of long discussion, and they just want you to give them that information without having worked for it. And I don't think you could just give that to somebody. I think you really do need to be curious, on your own, and seek out this information and understand why you are the way you are. Be introspective. Of course, you can't expect everyone to be introspective, and a lot of people think that
Yeah.
the quarantine time is the best time to build this big better you. But how many of us are actually doing that? There's a
Yeah.
pandemic going on. Do you really think people are going to focus on being better, or writing the best novel ever, or producing the best works of their lives? The world is ending.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard. It's definitely difficult, but accountability, right? That's
Yeah,
what it
true.
is. And actually, I've been thinking about that a lot too, because over the past few weeks, I've been rewatching one of my favorite shows, BoJack Horseman. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Ah,
Yeah,
wait. What's the show again?
BoJack Horseman.
Watch that Horseman. Oh, never heard of it.
Never heard of it?
Is
Really?
it on
It's
Netflix?
a great show. It's an animated series that talks about the life of a celebrity, or used to be famous horse
Mm-hmm.
celebrity, who had a show in his prime years, and eventually, the classic story of Hollywood, get addicted to drugs, be an alcoholic. But then the whole narrative focuses on the arc of redemption. To what point do we allow people back into our lives, and particularly about cancel culture, which is something that I'm honestly not supportive of anymore.
Yeah, it's very strong. The movement of cancel culture. It's like everybody wants to cancel everything once, once the people are not being within the narrative that they want to. Yeah.
I think instead of canceling, it's 2020. You should recycle. People should allow to
Yeah.
be. People
True.
should allow to become better, to learn and improve, and then come back and redeem themselves. If you cancel them, then there would be no point for these people to, in a way, improve themselves. Critically really do that
Yeah.
and learn their lessons. They would do it because they're ostracized in this society and they want to come back. So you would be doing it for all the wrong reasons. But if you could, I think, stop canceling people for a moment. I think that everyone should be able to, upon new information, change their opinion, and it shouldn't be, frowned upon so much. Because I think we all, if we, come upon a new information that could, change like our worldview completely, we could stick to our old ways and be wrong and just not grow, or you could really just grow as a human being, and take on these new ideas and understand that you don't know everything, and to be woke is to not be woke.
Yeah. Whoa. That's some like Shakespeare shit.
From Shakespeare. 2020 millennial Shakespeare. But some people
Yeah. I
do
mean,
say
like,
that Shakespeare is not relevant anymore, but people like Kanye West are more influential now. So
yeah. I mean, like Shakespeare, his influence like runs throughout the centuries, and what details that he taught us. I'm like it kind of resonate throughout the timeline of history. Yeah.
for sure, I think Shakespeare will always, hold a special place in my heart. I think if a lot of schools wouldn't just force, feed this information and put it on the syllabus and have us comprehend these texts, I think we would all enjoy it
Yeah.
in our own time. But because you have to grind this into your head and analyze Midsummer's Night or some other Shakespeare
Yeah.
play,
True.
you don't like it anymore. And I think the affinity to something, the closer you are to a subject, it takes the fun out of it sometimes. Just like my relationship to art, I think it's quite
Yeah.
ambivalent like that. There's this like component of
There's a
loving and
push and
hating.
pull.
There's a push and pull, and there's
Yeah.
this obviously this tug of war situation, but you love it because it's something that you enjoy and it's something you want to pursue. But at the same time, because you're so close to it and you want it to be this perfect, great thing, it destabilizes you and makes you question everything. And at the end of the day, you are so just consumed by it that you end up like hating it because you can't do it well. Because it's again two sides of the same coin.
It's like you're not getting like what you expected, or you're not like achieving what you should like be at, kind of like that, eh?
But we all have that, don't we? We have a certain set of timeline of what we should be at a certain age, or
Yeah. True.
it's natural. And I think there's a whole idea of like happiness, right? You go to like a mountain, and then there's another mountain, and you'll never be satisfied. Because when you are, there is just no point to living anymore. Just
Yeah.
like I'm
True.
depressed now. I'm depressed now. Like what more is there to do? But yes, it's important to have these goals, but at the same time, it's also good to be realistic and be easy on yourself when it's appropriate. Like hey,
Yeah. True.
realistically, you care about other people so much. You care about your closest friends, and you give them this pep talk about how they're doing their best and they should take it easy and that things will come when it does and everything will be okay and so forth. But then when it's yourself, you're just really hard on yourself for some reason, and then you think, well, how about you treat yourself like somebody that you cared for once? You treat yourself
True.
like your
Yeah.
best friend or somebody else, because when it's you, it's just too much pressure. Especially
Yeah.
intergenerational too. I think it's as
Yeah.
child of immigrant parents. A lot of it is, hey, you need to amount to something.
True. True. Because we kind of feel that we need to be at a certain level, and we should be perfect at the things that we should do. And if we're not perfect and we create a lot of mistake, we kind of question ourselves that why the fuck am I here? Like what why do I like do what why am I doing this? And then that kind of make and that kind of raise the issue, and the end result is that you're not going to be that productive, and you're probably just gonna sit around in the couch and just contemplating on what's your life had, what happened at your life,
Everything
and
that's ever led you to this moment. Just like,
yeah, true.
and you start thinking like, what if I had, taken this route instead of that other route, and you think that things would, run out differently had you made one decision differently. But I think it's all cumulative.
Yeah,
It's not, one mistake can't be the worst decision of your life, of course, unless it's murder or something along the,
yeah. Oh
borders of
God.
the legal system. But it really doesn't work that way. You will not be, jeopardized, or you will not suffer the consequences of something on a one-to-one scale like that. I don't think, for example, like karma, you do something bad, it's not going to come back in the exact same way. Maybe you stole somebody's sandwich in your office. Nobody else is going to come and maybe eat a piece of your sandwich. It's not going to be that one-to-one correlation. Maybe your
Yeah,
children will suffer it. Maybe somebody else will. Maybe you'll have one unfortunate day, or maybe not at all. Maybe there is no correlation. And what was that
true.
scientific? I think there was like a whole statement in psychology about how correlation is not causation, which I
Oh
think I thought
wow.
about for a very
Okay,
long time.
that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
Correlation
It
is
was like
not
it was when
causation.
I
Wow.
stumbled into like a 4th year psychology class to take notes,
Yeah.
and it wasn't in for the class I was supposed to take notes for, but then I didn't want to offend the professor by getting up, so I just stayed for the whole lecture.
Uh, so you just absorb what the professor is saying. I'm like, that's an interesting like term that you use. Wow,
You can
correlation is
literally
not
do that all the time.
causation.
Like you can, I think that was part of the there was a, I think somehow this actually relates to like racism, which is really weird, but there was a scientist, I don't remember his name, but he really was known for the scientific method, and he did these experiments, and he would never decide on the outcome before he had all the variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what he was known for was being the professor from one of his pupils who had come in and was asked to observe a fish. And he told him, hey, you need to write down, everything you could possibly observe and, about this fish. And then his pupil did so. He was given, as much time as he wanted. But after an hour, he just surmised that, hey, I know everything I could. Can we move on to the next lesson? And then he just kept doing it and doing it until, he realized that, hey, this was him learning. He wasn't going to be given this information, based on previous texts or whatnot. And I remember now, the scientist is known as Agassi. So then,
Mm-hmm.
Agassi was really well known for this, for being, a master observer, and I think just the new age, of science, right? But then when he was asked to, inspect the differences, biological differences of different ethnic groups, he could not, let go of these past, conceptions, and still deemed, certain ethnic groups, Africans and Asians and whatnot as, the subclass of people who he tried very hard to classify as differently in order to attribute to them certain, qualities that made it okay for us to enslave them for as long as we did.
Oh wow. Oh, that's kind of contradicting of him, and very biased in terms of scientific
Yeah, so
knowledge
you would
in
think,
a
right? You
way.
would think you would be able to apply
Yeah.
these, theories, but somebody had this whole saying, like, about how if Agassi had looked himself in the mirror, he would be able to see how, the context was that, eventually these, the corpses of, those groups, ethnic groups that he were studying would eventually be, in a museum, in glassed, And they
Yeah.
said that if Agassi had actually looked into the reflection, he would see back image of himself and see how similar he is to those people he was studying that he thought were different.
Wow, that's some real deep shit, man.
Yeah, I don't know. I took this
That's
like,
beautiful.
yeah, I think it is, and it's something that I never thought in a million years I would relate to, anything in the sciences in my everyday life, but there is a certain philosophy in all of it.
Yeah.
So I thought about, Agassi for a long time because the museum institution, something that I'm, very close to, and something that is my profession to
Yeah.
be,
The
is
place
so,
that you
it's,
work at,
yeah,
yeah?
yeah, it's so complicit in, institutional racism. And the idea that you can own somebody, if, for example, I had my lover with me and I thought, hey, I'm gonna keep him here, and you say in a casual way, romantically, oh, we belong to each other, but you can actually belong to each
Yeah.
other legally after his corpse had deteriorated, and you keep him in your home, or you could donate, your organs, and you can't really be sure where they end up, right? And over time, I think it could potentially be owned by some rich entrepreneurs or be used for something that you
Kinda.
didn't quite mean to. So the idea of like ownership, and I wouldn't want to see, myself in a museum one day, or that would be really odd. But
Yeah,
then
true.
yeah, but then if we think about this, and the whole like museum system would just collapse, and it just would no longer be ethical to do. it's
Yeah.
it's only okay
I
now
mean,
because our older ancestors have done it, but I think it
yeah.
began as something that was called the Cabinet of Curiosities, where
Mm-hmm.
people would basically collect things that they found interesting, oddities and
Mm.
artifacts, and they would keep them in their homes and had people come in, kind of like their museum in your home kind of situation. And then that became what is the museum institution. But a lot of it is,
Mm.
indigenous culture. A lot of it is not belonging to this sole, person, but it belongs to a whole community. So, you start to examine that, and you're like, should I really be, giving a tour about these things? Should I really be studying it in a way where I would want to become that researcher? And so many of what is,
Mm.
I think, researchers or writers are inspecting or, researching on basically for study, right? Certain cultures. But what makes you, I guess, liable, for the information that's out there? And no matter how many years you'll be expecting a group of like people interacting or an object, how close can you really get to that culture? I don't think that through your closeness to it, it doesn't make you any less racist, or
Yeah,
even come to
true.
terms with the understanding. You'll never be able to in that way.
Yeah, the important thing that we should like from saying the history and understanding the history, we should learn on reflecting on what had happened and what we should do better in terms of trying to change the narrative and trying to change the, what can you say, the life of these minorities of community, and trying to be like trying to like instill equality within every single race within this world, and having no sentiment of racism, and having no sentiment of I am right, you're wrong kind of stuff. I
Or
think.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
for sure that's like an ongoing agenda. It's something that we should continually learn to do, and it's difficult, right, to get past that first initial impression, which is something a lot of people consider to be what their basis of decision making is. But um, ordinarily, it would be that whole categorization of friend or foe, and it's how we, for a very long time, chose
Yeah.
to belong to certain groups, in society.